The Royal Navy is licking its wounds today after an embarrassing test blunder was exposed by the Sun newspaper. A Trident missile dramatically misfired and crashed into the ocean off the coast of Florida last month, with the Defence Secretary on board to witness the failure. The humiliating incident comes just 8 years after the Navy's last unsuccessful attempt, and at a time of high global tension when Britain's armed forces are being tested for a potential conflict with Russia. Let's get more on this now with former Royal Navy Chief Lord Admiral West. Lord West, very good evening to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. In American baseball parlance, the Royal Navy's 0 for 2, which is never a great place to be. What on earth happened? What do you think went wrong?
Well, I mean, certainly it's very embarrassing, and one has to sort of unpick it all a bit. The whole point of the DASO operation, which is what Vanguard, HMS Vanguard was the submarine was involved in, is designed to check out a submarine when it's had a refit and lots of work done and has got a new crew, to make sure that all aspects in the submarine work and that the crew know their jobs. And there's no doubt that actually this DASO operation did actually show that that all parts of the submarine work, which is good, and it jolly well should be, because it's been 7 years in refit, which is absolutely ridiculous and costing a lot of money. But everything worked, which is good. And the crew, the Americans, put them in simulators ashore, checked them all out. The Americans were very, very impressed with them. All of that worked. Of course, the thing that didn't work is the actual missile itself. And the missile that's used isn't one of the missiles you're normally firing with warheads. It's one that's used for this sort of operation, just to check it out, check out the system. And that is the bit that didn't work. It fired from the submarine in the way it should do. That's compressed air, shoots it out of the submarine. It's quite amazing, really. And the submarine hovers at about, I don't know, 40 feet or something under the water. The missile shot out, and then very cleverly, when it pops clear of the sea's surface, it starts to slow down, and sensors in the missile should then fire the rocket motors. And what didn't happen is the rocket motors didn't fire. And now, when one's looked into all the various aspects, we know what caused that problem within the missile. And that doesn't really affect the price of fish as regards the capabilities of the submarine. So that is the good news. But it looks bad. And I have to say, it is embarrassing. Of course it's embarrassing.
Well, it is, because at the end of the day, you can't really test fire intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, because for obvious reasons. But if all you can do is look at the last two in 8 years apart, both of which had a problem, then it's difficult to take the word, it would seem to me, of anybody who says, I'm sure everything will be fine if we really need to use them.
Well, as I say, I mean, we know exactly what caused it in those missiles, and those missiles are not the missiles that are used when we're, God help, I hope we never have to use them, but if we actually have to use them. And I think the sorts of things that actually I found very surprising. I was surprised that the media didn't pick it up quicker. In a way, I'm glad they didn't, because it gave time to look in to see what the problem was. I mean, if the media had picked it up the day of the launch, which they actually could have done, to be quite honest, because they'd mentioned about the firing in the media, but I think they were all distracted by Gaza and Ukraine and all sorts of things. But it gave time for a complete check through the whole system to make sure what had gone wrong. And I think also there's no way that Putin, yes, he'll have a laugh. Of course, he'll have a laugh about this, but there's no way that he thinks that our system doesn't work. I mean, the Russians are so sure it works, they don't even bother to put intelligence gatherers around the site when we're doing these firings. They always used to years ago, and they just don't do that now. And there've been a whole raft of firings, almost 200 firings altogether. A couple have gone wrong with the Americans as well, but it's the missile itself is the problem.
But is it also the fact that the system is so old? Because it's about 30 years old, I think, isn't it? The whole Trident missile and submarine system. And it may well have had a refit, but at the end of the day, maybe the reason the Russians don't bother spying on us anymore in that area is because they've seen it all before.
Well, I think they know that it all works, and there's no point in trying to find out and get any more information. I mean, what is certainly still true is our submarines we are better as submariners and with our submarines than the Russians are. But of course, we've got way too few, because defence has been starved of money since 2010. The coalition in 2010, in their defence review, cut the military by a third. I don't think the British public realised what the coalition did. And that was a dramatic cut. I mean, they got rid of Ark Royal, our carrier. They got rid of the Harrier aircraft, which the Americans were so pleased to get because they were completely modded up to date. And a whole raft of other areas. They cut numbers of sailors, numbers of soldiers dramatically. And ever since then, year on year, effectively, they've also cut defence. It's only very recently they've added any extra money, and that money isn't anywhere near what would have been there or what is required to ensure that our forces are capable. There's no doubt, you're quite right, the Vanguard class submarines should by now have been replaced by the Dreadnought class. But the government, post the coalition, particularly the coalition government, refused to say, right, let's move ahead with this program. Right. Consequently, these Vanguard class submarines are having to run 15, 20 years longer than they should have done. That's why Vanguard had this hugely expensive long refit. And what's amazing is they've done it in juggling to keep one submarine at sea all the time, hidden in the wastes of the North Atlantic or the Arctic. And it's done that. We've done that since 1968, 24/7. Every single day of the year since 1968. It's an amazing achievement, but my God, it's proving difficult, and that is not helped by the fact the government haven't been spending enough money. And what really annoys me, Putin now has increased his defense expenditure to 40% of his GDP. 40%. That is a war economy in any definition. Yeah. And what does our government do? Our government says, oh, well, I think, we must think about increasing our spending up to 2.5%, but, we'll think when we do it. If someone is doing that and thinking of war, you spend now. I find it absolutely extraordinary.
Well, we seem to be living now in a much more dangerous world than at any time I can remember. And Vladimir Putin is literally at war. So, he's already on a war footing. He's already, you might say he's deployed in a different area and he's in Ukraine and he might not be able to move anywhere specifically further west than that. But, suddenly we've got a NATO problem. Suddenly we've got a shortage of submarines, hardware and missiles problem. I mean, if there was something drastic to happen, are we still involved in a sort of mutually assured destruction scenario?
Well, we certainly still have that capability. God forfend that should ever happen. But you are absolutely spot on about Putin. I said in the House, I've said it now a couple of times recently, Putin actually acts as if he is at war with us. Yeah. He calls it his grey zone warfare. We know he's done cyber attacks, not just on Ukraine. He's done cyber attacks in Estonia and France. He's tried to do them against us. Luckily, our NCSC manages to stop him doing that. We know that he's had attempts at hitting cables under the ocean, which carry, all pretty well 95% of all our financial transactions and other things. We've got to actually stand up to him. If you don't show you're willing to spend money on defence, and if you don't show you're willing to fight for what you believe in, then autocrats, dictators like him, take advantage of. It's interesting in the Falklands, there's no doubt that one of the key drivers of Galtieri invading was to save £16 million. We got rid of Endurance, which is our only ship based down there. And he saw this going and thought, they don't care, and he invaded. And the final cost then in the Falklands was £4 billion and 300 of our men and killed. That's what happens when you don't spend money on defence.
Well, that's the thing, and he's chipping away. I mean, the latest story tonight is that he's declared a cod war on Britain, tearing up the fishing rights that have existed since around about 1956 that allow our fishermen to go and search their waters for cod. Apparently, he's basically nixed that and said you can't do that anymore in the Bering Sea.
I must admit, I hadn't heard that until I was listening to your programme. I hadn't heard that, but it's typical of his actions, I'm afraid. And we used to have, and there's another thing, we used to have huge fishing fleets up in the Barents Sea and, of course, all around Iceland who stopped us doing that. I mean, things have changed in this country. As a young officer in the Fishery Protection Squadron, little tiny frigate, we used to go right up in the Arctic because there were hundreds of British fishermen fishing up there. And that's all changed now. But it's interesting, I hadn't heard he'd changed that law, but we've got very few now go up there fishing, I'm afraid, because of other pressures on our own fishermen. Yes, absolutely right. But at least we've got some decent diversity in the armed forces now, Admiral Lord West, so we can be safe in our beds with that one. You've seen my comments in the Sunday papers about, I think when we're so short of people, when we're pressed, the important thing, what what our nation wants from its armed forces are forces that are capable of looking after our own people and defending our country and fighting, not actually of using lots and lots of men and women to actually make sure diversity is right and that there are specific groups for all these various special interest groups. And that is not what the military is about. We are all of one company. We all fight together. We all die together, and that's what we've got to have. And I'm afraid we've lost the plot of it.
Absolutely right. Admiral Lord West, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much for your help.